The Golden Fleece, Part 2, from the Tanglewood Tales. That, no doubt, will be a very great comfort to both of us, quoth the old woman. But never fear, we shall get safely across. So she threw her arms around Jason's neck, and lifting her from the ground, he stepped boldly into the raging and foaming current and began to stagger away from the shore. As for the peacock, it alighted on the old dam's shoulder. Jason's two spears, one in each hand, kept him from stumbling and enabled him to feel his way among the hidden rocks, although every instant he expected that his companion and himself would go down the stream together with the driftwood of shattered trees and the carcasses of the sheep and cow. Down came the cold, snowy torrent from the steep side of Olympus, raging and thundering as if it had a real spite against Jason, or, at all events, were determined to snatch his living burden from his shoulders. When he was halfway across, the uprooted tree, which I have already told you about, broke loose from among the rocks and bore down upon him, with all its splintered branches sticking out like the 100 arms of the giant Briareus. It rushed past, however, without touching him. But the next moment, his foot was caught in a crevice between two rocks and stuck there so fast that in the effort to get free, he lost one of his golden stringed sandals. At this accident, Jason could not help uttering a cry of vexation. "What is the matter, Jason?" asked the old woman. "Matter enough," said the young man. "I've lost a sandal here among the rocks. And what sort of a figure shall I cut at the court of King Peleus with a golden string sandal on one foot and the other foot bare?" "Do not take it to heart," answered his companion cheerily. "You never met with better fortune than in losing that sandal. It satisfies me that you are the very person whom the speaking oak has been talking about." There was no time just then to inquire what the speaking oak had said, but the briskness of her tone encouraged the young man. And besides, he had never in his life felt so vigorous and mighty as since taking the old woman on his back. Instead of being exhausted, he gathered strength as he went on and struggled up against the torrent. He at last gained the opposite shore, clambered up the bank, and set down the old dam and her peacock safely in the grass. As soon as this was done, however, he could not help looking rather despondently at his bare foot, with only a remnant of the golden string of the sandal clinging around his ankle. "You will get a handsomer pair of sandals by and by," said the old woman, with a kindly look out of her beautiful brown eyes. "Only let King Peleus get a glimpse of that bare foot, and you shall see him turn as pale as ashes, I promise you. There is your path. Go along, my good Jason, and my blessing go with you. And when you sit on your throne, remember the old woman whom you helped over the river." With these words, she hobbled away, giving him a smile over her shoulder as she departed. Whether the light of her beautiful brown eyes threw a glory about her, or whatever the cause might be, Jason fancied that there was something very noble and majestic in her figure after all, and that, though her gait seemed to be a rheumatic hobble, yet she moved with as much grace and dignity as any queen on earth. Her peacock, which had now fluttered down from her shoulder, strutted behind her in prodigious pomp and spread out its magnificent tail on purpose for Jason to admire. When the old dam and her peacock were out of sight, Jason set forward on his journey. After traveling a pretty long distance, he came to a town situated at the foot of a mountain, and not a great way from the shore of the sea. On the outside of the town, there was an immense crowd of people, not only men and women, but children too, all in their very best clothes and evidently enjoying a holiday. The crowd was thickest toward the seashore, and in that direction, over the people's heads, Jason saw a wreath of smoke curling upward to the blue sky. He inquired of one of the multitude what town it was nearby and why so many persons were assembled together. "This is the kingdom of Iolcus," answered the man, "and we are the subjects of King Peleus. Our monarch has summoned us together that we may see him sacrifice a black bull to Neptune, who they say is his majesty's father. Yonder is the king, where you see the smoke going up from the altar. While the man spoke, he eyed Jason with great curiosity, for his garb was quite unlike that of the Ilkians, and it looked very odd to see a youth with a leopard skin over his shoulder, and each hand grasping a spear. Jason perceived too that the man stared particularly at his feet, one of which, you remember, was bare, while the other was decorated with his father's golden string sandal. "Look at him, only look at him," said the man to his next neighbor. "Do you see? He wears but one sandal." Upon this, first one person, then another, began to stare at Jason, and everybody seemed to be greatly struck with something in his aspect, though they turned their eyes much oftener toward his feet than any other part of his figure. Besides, he could hear them whispering to one another. One sandal, they kept saying. "The man with one sandal. Here he is at last. Whence has he come? What does he mean to do? What will the king say to the one-sandaled man?" Poor Jason was greatly abashed, and made up his mind that the people of Iolcus were exceedingly ill-bred to take such public notice of an accidental deficiency in his dress. Meanwhile, whether it were that they hustled him forward, or that Jason of his own accord thrust a passage through the crowd, it so happened that he soon found himself close to the smoking altar, where King Peleus was sacrificing the black bull. The murmur and hum of the multitude, in their surprise at the spectacle of Jason with his one bare foot, grew so loud that it disturbed the ceremonies, and the king, holding the great knife with which he was just going to cut the bull's throat, turned angrily about and fixed his eyes on Jason. The people had now withdrawn from around him, so that the youth stood in an open space near the smoking altar, front to front with the angry King Peleus. "Who are you?" cried the king with a terrible frown. "And how dare you make this disturbance while I am sacrificing a black bull to my father Neptune?" "It's no fault of mine," answered Jason. "Your majesty must blame the rudeness of your subjects, who have raised all this tumult because one of my feet happens to be bare." When Jason said this, the king gave a quick, startled glance down at his feet. "Ha!" muttered he. "Here is the one-sandaled fellow, sure enough. What can I do with him?" And he clutched more closely the great knife in his hand, as if he were half a mind to slay Jason instead of the black bull. The people round about caught up the king's words indistinctly as they were uttered, and first there was a murmur among them, and then a loud shout. "The one-sandaled man has come! The prophecy must be fulfilled!" For you are to know that many years before, King Peleus had been told by the speaking oak of Dodona that a man with one sandal should cast him down from his throne. On this account, he had given strict orders that nobody should ever come into his presence unless both sandals were securely tied upon his feet. And he kept an officer in his palace whose sole responsibility was to examine people's sandals and to supply them with a new pair at the expense of the royal treasury as soon as the old ones began to wear out. In the whole course of the king's reign, he had never been thrown into such a fright and agitation as by the spectacle of poor Jason's bare foot. But as he was naturally a bold and hard-hearted man, he soon took courage and began to consider in what way he might rid himself of this terrible one-sandaled stranger. "My good young man," said King Peleus, taking the softest tone imaginable in order to throw Jason off his guard, "you are excessively welcome to my kingdom. Judging by your dress, you must have traveled a long distance, for it is not the fashion to wear leopard skins in this part of the world. Pray, what, may I call your name, and where did you receive your education?" "My name is Jason," answered the young stranger. "Ever since my infancy, I have dwelt in the cave of Chiron the centaur. He was my instructor and taught me music and horsemanship and how to cure wounds and likewise to inflict wounds with my weapons." "I have heard of Chiron the schoolmaster," replied King Peleus, "and how that there is an immense deal of learning and wisdom in his head, although it happens to be set on a horse's body. It gives me great delight to see one of his scholars at my court. But to test how much you have profited under so excellent a teacher, will you allow me to ask you a single question?" "I do not pretend to be very wise," said Jason, "but ask me what you please, and I will answer to the best of my ability." Now King Peleus meant cunningly to entrap the young man and to make him say something which should be the cause of mischief and destruction to himself. So with a crafty and evil smile upon his face, he spoke as follows. "What would you do, brave Jason," asked he, "if there were a man in the world by whom, as you had reason to believe, you were doomed to be ruined and slain? What would you do, I say, if that man stood before you and in your power?" And we're going to pause here and continue with this story in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, please reach down, click like, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. Love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.